What's up, meta nerds? We're finally at the documentary-length complete breakdown of the Venator. We'll be pulling from every resource available so we can understand every detail about this ship using cross-sections, RPG guides, novels, games, shows, and movies, looking at its capability and comparing it to other ships, and of course its history and behind-the-scenes facts. Let's start off with its actual size. At a length of 1,137 meters, it was about 29% shorter than the Imperial-class at 1,600 meters, but roughly 26% longer than the Victory-class at only 900 meters. The Venator's width was 548 meters, which was about 46% narrower than the ISD, and only about 3% thinner than the Victory-class at 546 meters. And it is the shortest overall, at only about 268 meters tall, about 40% shorter than the ISD, and about 7% shorter than the Victory class, and so you see that the designers were emphasizing a sleek, relatively compact design. And I'll break down the armament a bit more in a sec, but since we're on the comparison, we'll look at how those guns actually work and each of their different roles, but I want to quickly compare it to the ISD and Victory. Its primary armament is 8 heavy dual DBY-827 turbolaser turrets, 2 dual medium turbolaser cannons, 52-point defense laser cannons, 4 proton torpedo launchers, and 6 tractor beam projectors, showing that it was a very versatile warship balanced between anti-capital ship and anti-fighter roles. By comparison, the Imperial-class Star Destroyer had significantly heavier firepower, equipped with about 60 turbolasers and 60 ion cannons, including multiple heavy dual turbolaser turrets and plenty of additional weapon emplacements, offering roughly 7 times more offensive capability and optimized primarily for capital ship engagements and planetary bombardments rather than starfighter defense. It's not fighting swarms of droid forces. Their enemy, the rebels, do not have tons of starfighters, and so that's also why there's such an emphasis on the ion cannons, so that they can disable and capture ships, and then get to torturing intel out of all the rebels on board. The Victory class was smaller but specialized. It features about 40 heavy turbolasers and ion cannons, 10 quad turbolaser batteries, and 80 concussion missile tubes. That's about 20 times the explosives of the Venator, and did make it uniquely powerful for planetary assaults. And starting from the outside and working our way in, its hull was protected by thick Durasteel armor plating and powerful deflector shields, enabling the Venator to withstand significant enemy fire. And this double wedge profile shape, essentially a dagger-like main hull combined with a flared dorsal flight deck, gives it a broad forward section for hangars, while still retaining a narrow forward prow. Useful in aerodynamics since these ships are intended to go through planetary atmospheres, or when you actually had to ram through other ships and break through tight blockades. High atop the midsection sat twin command bridges, and it's the only ship that goes with this style. The starboard bridge serves as the ship's primary command center, while the portside bridge was dedicated to starfighter flight control. This dual bridge layout allowed excellent oversight for both naval and carrier operations, but also presented a larger target silhouette, a vulnerability exploited by several separatist attacks, most notably when Asajj Ventress targeted the Resolute's bridge. And this dual bridge layout is one of the most obvious ways to tell its dual role, the balance between traditional battleship and dedicated carrier, while managing to pack this all into a sleek frame. Propelling the Venator was an array of powerful ion thrust engines, typically 8 colossal thrusters arranged symmetrically at the stern, and there are the large, medium, and small. And having so many in of these different sizes allows for better maneuverability, as firing in different patterns allows you to cut in different directions. This engine bank gave the Venator excellent sublight acceleration and maneuverability for a ship of its size, allowing it to keep up in fast-paced fleet actions or pursuing fleeing enemy vessels. At 975 kilometers per hour or 606 miles per hour, it was tied in atmospheric speed with the ISD, but the TIE Fighter and Acclamator were 23% faster at 1200 kilometers per hour or 746 miles per hour, which really is saying the most for the assault ship. It's insane to think about it zipping through atmosphere as fast as a TIE Fighter. The heavily fortified reactor core underneath the main hull provided energy for everything on the ship. The primary reactor was a huge dome-shaped hypermatter annihilator reactor, capable of consuming up to 40,000 tons of fuel per second when operating at full output. Many think this is ridiculous Republic propaganda, maybe just a faked leak of intel to try and strike fear into the CIS. I'll let you decide on that. But this reactor fed both the engines and the extensive weapons and shield systems. It was backed up by at least one auxiliary reactor at the aft section, working as a backup power source. Each Venator was equipped with a Class 1 hyperdrive, making it extremely fast in hyperspace and putting it on par with most fast cruisers and starfighters, enabling rapid deployment across the galaxy, and most Imperial ships were of the Class 2. While it also had a backup Class 15. These hyperdrive systems were housed in reinforced chambers throughout the ships. In fact, multiple hyperdrive generators were located along the central sort of fin between the engines, with extensive onboard engineering decks dedicated to managing the reactor and hyperdrive. The Venator's strong propulsion and top-tier hyperdrive meant Republic fleets could respond quickly to distant crises, popping up anywhere in the galaxy as quick as possible. Again, unless you compare it to the Acclimator. But the Venator could also execute what are called micro-jumps, where you still stay in that star system, and this was a great tactic often used by Jedi commanders to outmaneuver enemies. And now we'll do a deeper dive into the armament. As a warship, the Venator-class carried a comprehensive suite of weapons for ship-to-ship combat and defense. Its primary batteries were those 8 DBY-827 dual heavy turbolaser turrets mounted along the dorsal ridge, 4 on each side of the central superstructure. These massive turbolasers, powered directly by the reactor, could rotate and fire in various modes, either alternating barrels for sustained rapid fire, or firing both barrels together for a heavier salvo. In close quarters mode, the guns could traverse targets in seconds, and their long-range targeting allowed Venators to pound enemy capital ships at a distance while still maintaining precision. And for broadside engagements, the Venator also housed banks of medium artillery. 2 medium dual turbolaser cannons were positioned in the port and starboard hull trenches near the bow. And internal artillery decks are lined with numerous AV-7 cannons, which was most often used for ground warfare, but this meant it could fire laterally through dedicated ports. And these broadside guns allowed a Venator to engage multiple adversaries or deliver volley fire when caught in close fleet actions. To counter smaller threats, the Venator carried extensive anti-starfighter defenses with at least 52 point defense laser cannons, all in these emplacements that dot its hull. These were usually fast-tracking twin laser turrets operated by gunners, designed to sweep the surrounding space and shoot down incoming fighters, missiles, or torpedoes. Also, light laser cannons were mounted near the aft sections to cover the engines against starfighter attacks, and for heavy ordnance, the Venator uses 4 proton torpedo launchers, capable of firing powerful ship-buster torpedoes, useful for assaults on hardened targets and orbital bombardments. It was also equipped with at least 6 tractor beam projectors, allowing it to snare and hold down enemy vessels or guide its own fighters and transports into docking maneuvers. Now, you may have noticed some Venators seem to have an additional ventral heavy beam weapon placed in their main hangar bay, essentially a spinal-mounted super cannon. This could be an attached experimental laser or a massive turbolaser. I believe, just like with the repurposing of the AV-7s, they took another ground-based vehicle, this time the SPHAT artillery piece. And if this could be plugged into the ship and powered by the main reactor, this would be a genius way to apply the SPHA. And when we see it in use, it was powerful enough to one-shot a Separatist Munificent-class frigate. And so you see the Venator's extensive armament made it a threat to almost any opponent. During the Battle of Coruscant, one Venator, the Gorlara, managed to cripple General Grievous's dreadnought by bombarding it with turbolaser fire. Backing up these weapons were deflector shield generators projecting overlapping protective fields around the hull, which, combined with the heavy armor, gave the Venator considerable resilience in combat. And it was designed so that the Venator could devote nearly its entire reactor output to weapons and shields when needed. No system would suffer if another was being maxed out. And this capability allowed skilled commanders to survive even brutal slugging matches, with this balance of power between offense and defense. It also was as much a carrier as a cruiser, with extensive hangar bays that enable it to carry and deploy a large contingent of fighters, dropships, and support craft. The forward half of the ship was dominated by a massive central hangar flight deck, running almost 500 meters down the ship's axis. This cavernous hangar, essentially a long dorsal flight deck, could be accessed by huge retractable doors on the dorsal surface. When opened, they exposed the entire hangar deck and allowed for rapid mass launch or recovery of starfighters. On either side of the central passage were staging bays and flight operations control areas to service multiple squadrons at once. And in the early designs, the Venator's ventral hull featured drop bay doors that could open directly to space from the underside of the hangar, allowing gunships or walkers to deploy straight down to a planetary surface, or letting smaller escort craft dock internally. And it also had independent side hangar bays, which were on the port and starboard side about midship. And these were protected with heavy blast doors and used for secondary craft or docking purposes. But the main hangar was large enough that even a consular-class cruiser or other frigates could easily dock inside when necessary, essentially letting the Venator serve as a mobile base for smaller ships, a true mothership of the fleet. A raised control post at the aft end of the hangar oversaw flight operations, coordinating all the launches and landings across the multiple bay entrances. The Venator truly is one of the most complicated ships operating at any time in the galaxy far, far away. In its standard configuration, just one Venator could carry an impressive complement of strike craft. The typical air wing might include a mix of space superiority fighters, bombers, and shuttles, like V-Wings, Eta-2s, ARC-170s, V-19 Torrents, Y-Wings, and Z-95 clone starfighters. These were all commonly seen in differing amounts, filling up Venator flight decks. Though it seems like the most common was to have 192 of the V-Wings or V-19s, 36 ARC-170s, and 192 Eta-2s, while also having around 20 to 40 LAAT gunships, and 24 ATTEs. But in general, we're told that it usually carries from around 90 to 100 starfighters of various types, balancing these wings across several squadrons, each usually composed of dozens of fighters, and then those support craft, but also various other lighter armored vehicles, and importantly, the prefabricated base structures and modules for establishing a planetary garrison. This effectively allowed a Venator to land an entire regiment-strength ground force on a planet during an invasion, all supported by its own aircraft and armored units. And it's just so simple, but confusingly not done by other factions, to have just one enormous hangar space, because it allows you to specialize for the mission, carrying a large number of small starfighters or fewer, bulkier craft, even whole frigates and cruisers, all depending on the strategic needs. As the Clone Wars progressed, the Venator design saw updates to better suit frontline combat. Early war Venators maximized carrier capacity with their huge open hangars, but by the war's end they would introduce the Mark II. This late war model reconfigured the hangar arrangement to improve the ship's combat durability, and the dorsal flight deck doors were reduced in size, minimizing that weak point on the hull. The space freed up by shrinking the hangar was refitted with additional power generators, extra armor, and more weapon emplacements, including sometimes that built-in axial beam weapon in the former hangar bay. The side hangars on this variant were also changed, linking into a single, smaller internal bay rather than separate bays. These changes sacrificed some carrier capacity but granted the Venator more firepower and resilience, showing the Navy's need for tougher warships in late war engagements. And both the Venator 1 and Venator 2 remained in service throughout the war's end. And in addition to official variants, some individual Venators could be modified for specific missions, like how some were retrofitted to serve as dedicated command ships, with enhanced communication suites and briefing rooms, and others configured as training carriers for clone cadets. One of the most interesting customizations was the installation of a meditation chamber aboard a Venator that became Darth Vader's early personal flagship in the early post-war era. But in general, most of them followed a standardized design to ease mass production and maintenance during the peak of fighting during the war. And now we can turn to its history. The Venator originated from the urgent military buildup that preceded and continued into the Clone Wars. In the final years of the Republic, as the Separatist crisis worsened, the Republic's judicial forces lacked large warships, leading to secret development of new battleships. Kuat Drive Yards won the contract to produce a frontline Star Destroyer for the Galactic Republic Navy, with Starship engineer Lyra Wessex, who was already by then a famed designer of warships, and she would become the Venator's chief architect. Her design aimed to blend strategic versatility with overwhelming tactical strength. It could function both as a fleet carrier, hosting entire wings of starfighters, and as a line battleship capable of standing toe-to-toe with enemy capital ships. The result was a cutting-edge warship that set a new standard for the Republic. Production began shortly after the Clone Wars erupted. The Venator-class was first deployed in 22 BBY, a few days or weeks at most after the Battle of Geonosis signaled the start of the war. Kuat Drive Yards manufactured the Venator at its massive shipyards, mostly at Kuat itself and likely other loyalist core world shipyards, in order to meet the wartime demand. It was historically significant as the first Star Destroyer commissioned by the Republic, marking the revival of large, triangular, or arrowhead warships in the Navy, obviously setting the tone for later years, which was seen during the times of the Old Republic, but mostly with the Sith Empire, and is estimated to cost around 59 million credits, significantly cheaper than the later 150 million credits that the ISD would fetch. In just those 3 years of the Clone Wars, from 22 to 19 BBY, hundreds of Venator-class Star Destroyers were built and deployed across the galaxy. By the war's midpoint, Venators formed the core of every Republic battle group, often supported by smaller cruisers and frigates. The Open Circle Fleet, the famed task force commanded by General Skywalker and Kenobi, contained multiple Venators emblazoned with the red Open Circle insignia on their hulls, signifying their elite status. The speed of Venator production continued to increase as the conflict raged on, though by the very end of the war, the Republic began shifting focus to even larger, more specialized Star Destroyers, plans that would eventually lead to the Imperial-class. Nevertheless, at the war's climax in 19 BBY, the Republic could field a massive number of Venators, with over 1,000 Venators taking part in the Battle of Coruscant alone. This extraordinary manufacturing feat was a testament to the Republic's industrial might under Chancellor Palpatine's wartime emergency powers. KDY, along with its subsidiaries like Rothana Heavy Engineering, churned out Venators in assembly line fashion to replace losses and reinforce fleets on multiple fronts. The design philosophy behind the Venator influenced other starship projects during this era, most notably the Victory-class, the smaller 900-meter cousin, which was actually designed by Rendili Vindicator Technologies, but it was only introduced in the war's final days, and primarily saw service in the Imperial Navy afterward. And they often operated in pairs or squadrons. A common doctrine was to have one Venator hanging back slightly to coordinate starfighter assaults, using its port-side flight bridge to direct the squadrons, while another pressed forward to directly face enemy destroyers, and others flanked or provided reserve support. Their vast complement of fighters allowed Venators to saturate local space with friendly craft, which was crucially needed against the Separatist' cheap swarms of Vulture droid fighters. Clone pilots flying V-Wings, ARC-170s, and Jedi Starfighters would launch from the Venator's hangars in coordinated waves to screen the capital ship or to strike at vulnerabilities in larger enemy vessels. Meanwhile, the Venator's own turbolasers could soften up opposing warships at range, then pound them at close quarters once the shields failed. This carrier battleship synergy was demonstrated repeatedly, like in the Battle of Ryloth, when Y-Wing bombers disabled Separatist blockade ships, which were then finished off by the concentrated Venator turbolaser fire. Its design also allowed it to serve as a planetary assault ship. In these operations, the Venator would enter high orbit above the combat zone and deploy its legion of troops, walkers, and gunships to the surface. The ventral drop bays, in those early models, meant ATTE walkers could literally be drop deployed from the ship without landing craft. More commonly, Venators would launch LAAT gunships packed with clone troopers, escorted by fighter cover, in order to land ground forces during invasions. The ship's close air support came from its fighter wings, and its orbital bombardment capability came from heavy turbolasers and torpedo launchers, which could strike fortified ground targets or annihilate hardened installations from orbit. Of course, that's if they didn't have planetary shields, which even a Venator couldn't destroy. Captains were authorized to conduct base Delta Zero operations, which were complete surface bombardments, though such extremes are rare during the Clone Wars. Though a notable example of orbital fire support was during the campaign on Umbara, where destroyers rained turbolaser blasts on enemy positions to assist clone troopers. And the Venator's flexibility extended to non-combat roles as well. It could act as a large transport or cargo ship when needed, carrying relief supplies or building materials to remote worlds. Its hangars and its storage holds could be loaded with food, medicine, or equipment to set up new bases, and Venators often performed relief missions to war-torn planets. They also served as fleet replenishment vessels, ferrying fuel and munitions to smaller warships on long deployments. This logistical role was possible because of the Venator's enormous cargo capacity, being up to 7,000 metric tons of cargo and consumables for 2 standard years. While in fleet formations, they typically took on the role of flagships and command ships. A Jedi General or Republic Admiral would station their command staff on the Venator's bridge, using its advanced sensors, holocommunications, and command and control facilities to coordinate the battle. They were also equipped with long-range sensor suites and sophisticated battle computers, allowing a task force commander on a Venator to monitor wide areas of the battleship. The prominent bridges with panoramic views gave the commander direct visual oversight as well, though at the cost of being exposed, and many Venators did suffer bridge hits that took out the command crew. Republic battle doctrine often saw Venators deployed in what were called force projection missions, pushing deep into enemy territory. They could jump in, launch a surprise starfighter strike on a droid foundry or fleet staging area, and withdraw before the enemy mustered a counterattack, leveraging their speed and hit-and-run tactics favored by certain Jedi like Anakin Skywalker. Conversely, in set-piece battles, the Venator would anchor the line of battles, standing toe-to-toe with Separatist capital ships. The heavy guns could engage the likes of Commerce Guild destroyers and Banking Clan frigates, while its fighters dealt with the Separatists' numerous droid bombers. Many clone officers said there was nothing like a Venator holding the line, given its mix of offense, defense, and carrier support. Finally, Venators also undertook patrol and blockade duty. A single Venator in open space could patrol hyperlanes, inspect incoming vessels with its tractor beams, and serve as a mobile base to police a sector. In blockade scenarios, groups of Venators could coordinate to seal off a planet, one or two maintaining fighter patrols while others inspected or intercepted blockade runners. Because of their significant fighter complement, Venators were very effective at blockade enforcement, like seen on Ryloth and Umbara, where they choked off separatist supply lines. Their mere presence was often enough to deter enemy fleets from attempting breakthrough, unless the enemy had overwhelming numbers or a Dreadnought-class vessel. If confronted with superior firepower, like Grievous's flagship or a separatist fleet in much larger numbers, Republic doctrine was for Venators to fall back on their fighters and coordinate multi-ship tactics, encircling the larger enemy or concentrating fire on one target at a time. A good example of this is when 3 Venators working in tandem managed to badly damage the Invisible Hand, Grievous's Providence-class Dreadnought. This kind of teamwork was a hallmark of Venator crews, often led by Jedi who had that bit of unfair advantage in their Force connection, making it easier for everybody's mind to be on the same page as it were, coordinating their attacks via the Force. So in summary, the Venator class proved to be a jack-of-all-trades capital ship, not really giving anything up, but excelling in all its roles as a carrier, destroyer, and transport, and its introduction fundamentally shaped Republic naval strategy, moving away from reliance on separate escort carriers and battleships, and toward a unified platform that could do it all. When the Republic became the Empire in 19 BBY, the Venators seamlessly transitioned into Imperial service. The newly formed Imperial Navy immediately absorbed the existing Venator fleet into its ranks. After all, it's all the same people working with the same system, just under a new name. But now you have hardened war veterans with years of experience who are being told to use these Venators to impose the Emperor's will on his own people. These Venators were now vital in consolidating Imperial authority all across the galaxy. They were dispatched to enforce Imperial law in resisting systems, and to secure all shipyards and hyperlanes. They also undertook mop-up operations against remaining separatist holdouts. In the months after the Clone Wars, many Imperial task forces hunted down separatist warlords or droid fleets that had not yet received the shutdown signal for a variety of reasons. They also confronted the first stirrings of rebellion. Fledgling rebel cells and insurgencies, where their overwhelming fighter complement and troop capacity could quickly squash uprisings. And many of these fledgling rebel cells and insurgencies were quickly destroyed by the overwhelming fighter complement and troop capacity. One notable and grim mission early in the Empire's rule was the razing of Taipoca City on Kamino. A trio of Imperial Venators, under Vice Admiral Rampart's command, bombarded the Kaminoan cloning facility from orbit, obliterating the city once the Empire had evacuated its assets. The destruction of Kamino, which was one of the ultimate goals of the Separatists, one of Grievous's most darkly pursued plans, would end up being achieved by Venators. This strike meant to eliminate a potential future enemy of the Empire, in hopes of ensuring that the Emperor's smaller secret cloning facilities were the only facilities in the galaxy. This event would be one of the most stunning displays of the Venator's destructive capabilities, being used against one of the Republic's strongest allies. During the same period, some Venator-class ships were assigned to high-ranking Imperial Moffs as personal flagships. Regional governors like Moff Tarkin initially employed Venators to patrol their sectors before newer ships came online. Other Venators were relegated to training duties, serving as flight academies and gunnery training platforms for the growing Imperial Navy. Their spacious hangars made them ideal for training new TIE fighter pilots in large numbers. But as the Empire's military expansion continued, the Venator did begin to show its age. By the time of the Galactic Civil War, from 0 BBY to 4 ABY, they had been just about completely phased out of frontline service, replaced by the next-gen Imperial-class Star Destroyer, being far larger and more powerful, but a few did remain active in secondary roles or in reserve fleets into the Civil War era. Records indicate that some were kept in planetary defense forces or as system picket ships, and some were even operating as patrol craft in backwater regions after the Battle of Yavin. But ultimately, almost all Venators met an ignoble end in the scrapyards. The Empire, not needing so many medium carriers, decommissioned and scrapped dozens of Venator-class Star Destroyers within a decade of the Clone Wars' end. Worlds like Bracca became starship graveyards, where Venators were dismantled by the Scrapper Guild for parts and raw materials. On Bracca, entire hulks of Venators from the Clone Wars could be seen strewn across the landscape, sharing a grave with Separatist ships, showing that these were all just playthings of the Emperor, that the Republic and CIS were always destined for the same end. And it was on one of these derelict Venators that Clone Captain Rex and the Bad Batch commandos later hid and fought Imperial forces, finding many of the ship's systems still marginally functional despite its decay. A few Venator wrecks became historic relics, like the crash site of the Venator Tribunal, lost during Order 66, was discovered years later by Darth Vader, who personally investigated the ruins. In many ways, the Venator class left behind a lasting legacy, either as resources on scrap worlds, as training grounds for a new generation of Imperial naval crews, and in the very design lineage of the Empire's Star Destroyers. That's it for its breakdown, and as for cool facts and behind-the-scenes stuff, I didn't want to break up the flow earlier, but in case you're curious, here's some of the named Venators we know of and their famous commanders. The Resolute was the flagship of Anakin and Admiral Williff Yularen. The Negotiator was Obi-Wan Kenobi's. Triumphant was Master Plo Koon's. Liberty was Aayla Secura's. Endurance was Admiral Shoan Killian's Venator. And a crazy crossover inspiration is that the engine room in the Venator was based on the gravity control system of the SDF-1 Macross of the first Macross anime series from the early 80s. In Latin, Venator means hunter. Here are some amazing images of the concept art from Ryan Church. And originally he said that the idea for the dual bridges was to address a critique of the Star Destroyers and what was seen with the A-Wing, that you could just crash into the bridge, and so having two separate bridges gave you a sort of redundancy. Visually, it also served the purpose of making sure that the audience knew that it wasn't the same ship as the Acclamator, which was seen in Attack of the Clones, because we only first see the Venator in Revenge of the Sith, opening up at the end of the war, though later material would fill out that it was there basically from the start. Church also designed the Venator to have that long tail at the back end, meaning to be a subtle nod and make it kind of look like a sword. The wing part being like the hilt, and this back part being the handle or grip. But also the overall look was based on aircraft carriers, but also the F-16XL fighter jet. If you made it this far, please hit that like button, I really need your help. Subscribe so you don't get lost in the algorithm, comment your thoughts and suggestions, but most important of all, remember, great ships never die, they just inspire later designs. And the Force will be with you, always.